Okay, recording is started. Welcome to the Manhattan GMAT Study Hall for December 5th of 2013. We are going to do sentences with initial modifiers in sentence correction. Again, the attribution, all of the problems that you're going to see are from the GMAT prep software, which is copyright GMAT. So there it is. Okay, and remember where those multiple choice answers are found. They are found here in the little A through E menu underneath your name. Let's do a problem. So here's a sentence correction problem. And again, don't forget where the multiple choice questions are found. Here's a timer. It's a longer problem. It's going to be a little bit more time than usual. Go. Okay, only about half of you guys have answers so far, a little bit more than half, so we'll give you another 15 or 20 seconds. But remember, this is a test where you do have to answer all the problems. You can't not answer a problem. So if you don't have an answer yet, go ahead and pick one, and let's talk about it. Okay, so we got a couple of non-responders. Here are the results that we have so far. Let me show you what we've got. So what we have is we got a majority in favor of choice B here, but we've got some people picking other choices. Let's go ahead and take a look. So again, today's topic is going to be initial modifiers. So let's talk about what that means before we go back to that problem. So initial modifiers, what are they, is the question. So here's a sentence. I'll put a sentence up on the board and we're going to talk about it. Okay, there's a sentence. So if that sentence is okay, what I'm going to do is change your polling to a red X and a green check. So if that sentence is okay, then give me a green check. And if that sentence is not okay, then give me a red X. Okay. So here is what you guys are saying. Not everyone is responding, but so we got mostly red X's, we got a few green checks. Let's talk about it. The sentence is actually not okay. It's not a thing. All right, does anybody know why not? You may want to type in the chat box. What's wrong with it? I mean, if you were speaking English, the sentence would be totally fine, which is the reason why it's an issue in the first place. Yeah, right. So I'm just going to go ahead and take what Derek wrote in the box and put it on the board. So Derek says this: the wind isn't coming up from school. So that's exactly what the problem is here. You have a sentence that implies that the wind itself has to go to school. So let's talk about what's going on here in general. We have this thing at the beginning that is a modifier. Make sure you know what modifiers are. Right? Modifiers are pieces of sentences that are not complete sentences by themselves. So in other words, they have to actually stick to something or describe something. Yeah, so, but if you have a modifier like that, then coming home from school, it's got to describe who's coming home from school. So the modifier must describe someone or something. Presumably it's going to be a someone in a sentence not coming home from school, because things don't really come home from school. So, and who is this intended to describe? Well, clearly the person who was coming home from school in this sentence is me. But the way these things work, and there's a very general principle of modifiers, not just for things like this, But the idea of modifiers is that they describe the stuff that is next to them, or at least as much next to them as possible. So what this sentence is doing, whether you like it or not, is saying that the wind was coming home from school. So, I mean, it's a grammatically sound sentence, but it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense, because the wind doesn't have to come home from school. So, hold on just a second. Okay, pardon the small interruption there. So, there's a couple ways that the sentence could be corrected. If we had to leave the red part alone, what word would have to come here? Yeah, it would have to say I, right? So then you just have to construct the rest of the sentence around that. So you could say, one example of a correct version would be coming home from school. I was blown off my bike by the wind. Okay, so that's that. I gotta take a 30-second break. Quick, I'm having a couple of tech issues, sorry. All right, sorry about that. I guess that's going to be on the recording because I don't think I turned the microphone off. Okay, back to what we were doing here. So one way to correct this sentence would be to type coming home from school, I was blown off my bike by the wind, because I'm the one who was coming home from school. So, yeah. Another way you could correct it is this. As I was coming home from school, the wind blew me off my bike. This would also be a thing. Does anybody know why this is not wrong? Because this is wrong. So you might reasonably think this is wrong for the same reason. Does anybody know why this is not wrong? Yeah, the subject is there. So in other words, this is not actually a what at all. This is not a modifier. So just make sure that when you apply these kinds of principles, make sure you're applying them only when they actually do apply. So this construction here is not a modifier. So it doesn't follow rules that apply to modifiers. It has its own subject and verb. So like it does have to relate to the meaning of the sentence, but it doesn't have to strictly describe a particular noun in the way that this does. So if there's any questions about that, feel free to ask in the chat box. Otherwise, we'll go back to this problem, this one right here. Okay. So remember what's always the first thing you want to do when you look at a sentence correction problem. Remember when you look at any sentence correction problem. What comes first? First thing that you do. Tell me in the chat box. First thing that you do. You read it, and when you read it, what do you look for? You don't need to necessarily find subjects and verbs, Julio, because if they're not testing subject-verb agreement, then finding that is not really a thing. I mean, there's not always a modified word either. I mean, today there will be because you know that's today's theme. But yeah, the only thing that you have to get from the original sentence is what it means. So the first thing you want to do is figure out what the sentence is supposed to be saying. Because everything else flows from that, and if you're just looking at the underlined part, you're not really going to have a full picture of what the sentence actually says. Because like by itself, the underlined part doesn't have meaning. So when you first read, it's very important to do this. You need to ignore grammar, you need to ignore mechanics, you don't think about those things. You just read it as though you were reading an email from someone who is not terribly good at writing in English. So, yeah, I mean, you figure out what it says. So, what is this saying? Because in a sentence like this one, you might have to think about it for a little bit. Because something has to be, when you read these first few words, you know that something is going to be compared here because it starts with like. So who can tell me what is like the grassy fields and old pastures in this sentence? Because when you first read that, you might think you're going to compare grassy fields and pastures to like some other area or other like place. But not in this sentence. Yeah, right? It's the bird. So what this sentence is saying, what is this sentence saying? It's saying the grassy fields and pastures are like the sandpiper itself. I mean, that's kind of a weird comparison, but that's why you have to focus 100% on what is the meaning when you first read the sentence. So, because these things are alike in the sense that both of them are vanishing. That's what the sentence is. The sentence is telling you that the grassy fields and pastures are going away, and so is the bird. So, it's like coming home from school, the wind blew me off my bike, except now, instead of coming home from school, it's like the grassy fields and old pastures of blah, 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 blah. So let's take a look at that. This thing right here, that's the coming home from school part. So this is what absolutely, bar none, must be right there. It's got to be the bird. The bird, the sandpiper, something referring to the bird and not to like an area or anything like that. So for that reason, we can eliminate 3 of the choices. That the birds themselves are vanishing is not the bird. In the northeastern United States, sandpiper is vanishing is not the bird. And then same problem with E. And remember that possessives are basically adjectives, right? So sandpiper is vanishing is like fast vanishing, slow vanishing. It's the vanishing. It's not the bird. And then C is not the bird either. C is the whole idea that the birds themselves are vanishing, but that's not the comparison. So you're left with A and B, the sandpipers and the bird. How do we resolve A and B here? Again, the main focus of today is to get down to A and B, so if you got down to that, then that's the focus of today. But let's make sure we know how to make that decision. Does anybody want to say in the chat box, how can you decide A versus B? Couple ways. Redundancy, what do you think is redundant? Careful there, we'll discuss, but no, that's not redundant. Notice the way that choice A is written. Choice A is written with this here as an ing modifier. So remember that you can look at the core of the sentence if you ignore that modifier. So what you're left with in A is the sandpipers is a result of. And that's not a thing. You can't do that. So that's actually wrong for 2 reasons. The first is that sandpipers doesn't agree with is. So it doesn't make sense in terms of grammar. But also it's not true anyway. Like the sandpipers themselves are not a result of development. I mean, it's the fact that they are disappearing is a result of development. So wrong meaning and incorrect grammar in choice A. And notice again, this is a technique when you have to deal with a lot of words. If you find things that are modifiers, you can look at the sentence that's left when you take those modifiers out. So we've got B. Now let's talk about that choice, because at least one person didn't like this phrasing. Does anybody know what that's all about? Like, why did it say itself there and not the bird? I mean, this is not something that they're explicitly going to test you on, but you have to know that it's not wrong so that you don't eliminate a choice for a reason that's not actually an error. Does anybody know Does anybody know why the bird itself is not redundant? Like, why is itself there? What function does that serve? We don't want words that, we don't want words that are there for no reason. So what is this weird word itself doing there? It's kind of strange. Because of the comparison with the fields, Anna, tell me more about that. We're getting there. We're getting there. So let me just take this to another page and just simplify the sentence. The sentence that we're discussing right now is, like the grassy fields and old pastures, comma, the bird itself is vanishing. The sentence is longer than that, but that's the core idea. Let me tell you what this word is doing. A lot of you guys are hinting at it, so let's just kind of talk about it. The reason this word is here is because the sentence is making a comparison that's not an obvious comparison. So basically the function of this word in this sentence is saying, and again, they will not explicitly test you on this, but you just have to know that this is not wrong, is the point. And what they're doing with this word here is they're saying, hey, dear reader, yes, I actually mean to compare these two things, even though they don't look comparable. That's what that's doing. Like, for example, if you said something like Hemingway's books were never as controversial as Hemingway himself. Because again, you're comparing books to a person here, which would normally not really be a thing. But if this is what you mean, then it's what you mean. Like, if you mean that, Hemingway himself, started fights and was like a, troublemaker, much more than his books stirred up controversy, then the himself helps to emphasize that sentence. So that's the point of the itself here. Again, that's not a thing that's going to be tested, but make sure you know that it's not wrong when you see it. So any other questions about this problem, feel free. If not, we will look at another one. Well, the first part is a modifier. The first part is basically just like the fields and pastures. The rest of it is, it's got a subject and verb in it, but it's not, that's all within a modifier. Like, notice that the bird needs for feeding when it returns in May. Like, you can take that blue part in parentheses out. So basically the entire first part is just like the fields and pastures. So, some modifiers have, Sahil, did you just get here? Because we did spend about 3 or 4 minutes talking about why A is incorrect. So if you just got here, then go ahead and watch the recording when it comes out. How do you tell when a modifier ends? Let's talk about that question. How can you tell when a modifier ends? Sometimes you'll have clues like commas and things, but what's the real, how do you really figure this out? But there's modifiers after the subject too. You can put a modifier anywhere you want. Remember what step 1 is of every sentence correction problem in the history of the world. The real way to answer this question is you just got to think about what the sentence is saying. So, and if you think about what the sentence is saying, then it should be pretty clear which things are descriptions of which other things. Like here, if this is a slow process, then this is the part that is perfectly okay to be slow. If it takes you a long time to figure out what is describing what and what the sentence. There's a lot of words here. I have to sit and look at this for a while to figure out exactly what it's trying to say. But all of these words here are just a description of the fields and pastures. So if you know that, if you take time to figure that out, then you'll realize it's a modifier. I mean, also it's a recognition thing. So basically the two ways that I would answer that question would be, first, think about what the sentence is trying to say. But then also make sure you can recognize the look of different kinds of modifiers. So, I mean, you know, you might want to have a few canonical examples in your head just so that you can compare these. Like, if I say the dog that we adopted at the shelter is cute, that's the same thing as just saying the dog is cute with a little bit of extra description. So that the sandpiper needs for feeding and nesting, blah, 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 is a lot like that we adopted at the shelter. So, like, if I memorize a sentence like this one right here, the dog that we adopted at the shelter is cute. If I memorize this as an example of, okay, I can take this out, it's a modifier. It's actually two modifiers, but yeah. Then this is the same sort of thing. So if you have this team of knowing what the meaning is in the first place and then knowing what modifiers look like, you're going to be unstoppable. Okay, someone asked about of changes in. So let's take this to a new page. There you go. And then let's see if the crowd, see if we can crowdsource this question. Anybody got a response to that? Yeah, well, it's just a parallel structure, right? Like you have the vanishing is a result of two things. There are two sources of the problem. Anytime you have an A and a B bullet point and other bullet point, that's automatically a parallel structure. So bullet point number one is residential and industrial development. And bullet point number two is changes in farming practices. So you want these to appear in parallel structures. And you've got, so here's the and. The thing after the and is this. If you don't know what I'm doing here, you can watch the Parallelism Thursday's recordings, which we'll talk more about this whole signal words and stuff. So that is parallel to this, so you are good there with the parallelism. Lucia, for that question, go ahead and watch the parallelism recording. I think it's from sometime around May of 2010, and we go into like half an hour of detail about that question. So check it out. Okay, let's move on to another problem here. I think we've sufficiently killed this one. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so again, don't forget where your multiple choice answers are. Where's your multiple choice answers? Okay, and here is a timer. Timer. And have fun. Okay. If you don't have an answer, go ahead and pick one. Remember also that problems in these study halls, because there's a theme that is known, right, which is kind of sort of cheating. So, I mean, these problems shouldn't take you as long as they would in the real test, because you already know there's going to be something, right? You know there's going to be an initial modifier problem here. So that should cut down the amount of time that you take. So, like Precious, Casey, Azim, we still don't have answers from you guys. So make sure you pick a thing. Okay, here are your responses. So we are like all over the place on this thing. Lots of A's, lots of B's, decent number of of ease. So let's talk about it. So what is the coming home from school part of this one? Well, in contrast to ongoing trade balances, that's a modifier. And by the way, before we talk about this problem, how do you guys feel about when they underline the whole sentence? Do you guys like it? Do you not like it? Do you not care? Do they have any strong opinions for the chat box? When they underline the whole thing, how do you feel about that? Let's talk about it. So some people hate them. Some people are like, whatever. Some people are like, Debbie, not necessarily, but that's today's theme. So today you're going to have a lot of modifiers at the start of the sentence. I mean, so most people don't seem to like when they underline the whole sentence. Let me try to change your mind on that. Let's have a little chat about what happens when the whole sentence is underlined. Let's talk about that. The first thing here is that this is the only time when you don't have to keep looking up and down and up and down and etc. Right? I mean, because if you have a part of it, so the problem here is that you have to keep, with this sentence, you have to just keep looking up and down and up and down and up and down and like, okay, there's the first half, there's the second half. Especially when you get to the later choices, it gets really annoying to have to do that. But when you have this kind of sentence, never. You don't ever have to do it. You can just look at one thing, and that's much easier than having to look at two things. So that's one advantage. There's going to be two huge advantages. That's one of them. The other advantage is that since the answer choices are longer, I mean, they're entire sentences, right? There are usually more issues per wrong answer choice. I mean, when you have a really, really short underline, you usually like one thing wrong, and if you don't get it, then you're kind of dead. But in longer sentences, there's usually a handful of issues with each choice. So you should actually like these problems better because you don't have to keep looking up and down, and you usually have second chances. So don't hate these things. I mean, these are your friends. All they want to do is be your friend. Okay, so initial modifiers, coming home from school type of thing, in contrast to blah, 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 that's an initial modifier. When compared with is an initial modifier. That's a little bit sketchball, but we'll talk about it in a second. Compared with is an initial modifier. And then compared to is an initial modifier. Okay, so those things are. And what's nice here is that they're all the same. I mean, there are different wordings, but all of them are talking about compared to a trade imbalance. So what do we want to compare with a trade balance? With these trade balances, I should say. With these trade balances. Yeah, like this is not one of those bird and fields type of weirdo comparisons. I mean, this is a very straightforward comparison, right? Like you are just comparing one sort of trade imbalance with another one. So it's these things with the U.S. trade deficit. So it's the trade imbalances with China and Japan versus the U.S. trade deficit with Mexico. There's the sentence. And again, the only way to figure this out is to focus on it at the beginning when you first read the sentence. The only thing, literally the only thing that you should be thinking about when you first read the sentence is, what does this mean? What are they even trying to tell me here? Okay. If someone has their hand raised, if you have a question, just type it in the box. Okay, so A has, in contrast to these trade imbalances, and then you have the United States trade deficit, so that works. At least that part of it works. Let's do this color code you here. Red underline has to go with blue underline. Okay, so A will keep. B, you've got the United States, the country. That's not comparable with trade balances. This is also the United States, so that's not a thing. This is the United States, so that's not a thing. And then this, the United States record exports, this is not phrased in a way that makes sense in English. Like if you can't say United States record exports, you would have to have a possessive there. So it's kind of like saying Ron small car, that doesn't work. But if I said Ron's small car, that does work. So this would have to be the United States apostrophe record exports. Notice this doesn't work the same way. If you just have a United States noun, then that's fine. Like you can have California highways. That's fine. It's only when you're sticking an adjective in there that you start having issues. So you can't have like California scenic highways. Not so fine. Now you need the apostrophe S. So the United States trade deficit is a thing. It's kind of like the United States Congress or the United States Senate or the United States House of Representatives. Those things are fine. But if you start having descriptions in front of it, then you need to possess it. So, and also, this is the wrong comparison anyway. I mean, we want it to be the trade deficit, not the exports. So that's an easier way to eliminate it. You don't even have to go over all that craziness. Only one choice that even makes the right comparison. How about that? So what you should think about, because this problem did cause you guys some grief. Again, here's your results. I mean, only about 1/3 of people here. Record exports sold. Where does it say? Yeah, sold exports is redundant. Derek, I don't know what it sounds like you're saying. I don't think anyone would say that is redundant, but I think you're trying to say I don't think anybody would say that because it is redundant. So it's redundant. Yeah, you don't sell exports. You either sell things to another country or you export them, but you don't sell exports. So that's a good catch. Yeah. But I mean, notice the results here. I mean, this is not a super high percentage of respondents here. So there's a focus issue because notice you're already sort of cheating in the sense that you know that today's topic is this. So you already have a jump on it. You know that you're supposed to be looking for an initial modifier. And then on top of that, every single answer choice except for A has an initial modifier that doesn't work. Like only A has the trade deficit right behind its comma. So it should be pretty straightforward if you are focused on the topic of today. So if you're one of the people who pick these other choices, think about it for a while. Figure out where you lost focus. Figure out how you got off track of what we're covering today. Because focus is a very big thing here. Like if you're not looking for a thing, then it's going to be very hard to improve at this. So 2 a.m. is when I'm at my best. So I don't feel your pain. Okay, so let's move on to another one unless somebody has questions. There's 1 or 2 people typing, so let's see what they have to say. If you're typing, go ahead and at least the apostrophe S. I mean, again, they're not going to make that the only issue because it's sort of a subtle thing in a lot of cases. But in general, not very often can you get away with not having it. Like, you can never have it after, you can never not have the apostrophe S after, like, a person's name or a thing like a cat or a dog or something. But after geographical regions like the U.S. and Colorado and Arizona and California, you can do that. I don't really want to spend a ton of time on that because it's never going to be the only thing that they test. So if you don't really have a sense of that, it's not a super high priority issue. But at least you can use these examples that I have here as a starting guideline. But if that distracts you from the initial modifiers, then that's not a good thing. Okay, typing. No one else is typing. Okay, let's move on to the problem. How about that? So remember where your multiple choice question answers are found. Multiple choice answers, there they are. And here's a timer. Go for it. Okay, if you are a non-responder, then please become a responder. Still a couple of you guys. There's a Michael, there's a Precious, there's a Francis C, there's a Jagdish, there's a Boris, Boris, and then Azim. Okay, again, I can't force you to answer the questions, but if you remember how the test works, right? The test does not allow you to not answer a question, so you got to make sure that you're training yourself to answer the questions. Okay, nobody picked A. We got a spike at D. Lots of people picking E as well. So D and E are the choices that do the initial modifier correctly. So that's good that most of you guys are picking those. But let's discuss. So it should be pretty clear that if it's unlike most severance packages, then we're going to have to compare that to some other severance package. Right, so it's going to have to be most severance packages. And even if you don't know what a severance package is, you can still follow the logic of the sentence. I mean, it's pay that you get when you're fired or whatever. But if you don't know that, it's like you're never going to have to know what sophisticated terminology means to solve these problems. So. But it's most severance packages. If you don't know what a severance package is, you can call it a pink flamingo. The sentence will still make sense. Most of those versus one special package is what this sentence is trying to do. Yeah, special in some, not necessarily a good way. So, okay. Notice, again, this is why you want to not think about anything but the meaning first. Like, where does the initial modifier end? Like, how much of this is the initial modifier? Who, chat box, how much of that sentence is the initial modifier? Yeah, all the way up to collect, right? Not just unlike most severance packages. Because, and this is why, like I was saying on that other slide, here's the other slide, where one person asked a question about how do you tell when a modifier ends? Well, meaning and then the look of different kinds of modifiers, but the meaning here is paramount, right? So if you think about what this sentence is telling us, it's going to be severance packages, but then which is a modifier. So if you know that sort of thing is another modifier, then you know that that's all included in your initial part. So this is the coming home from school here. All of this is an initial modifier. So unlike most severance packages, and inside that you have a further modifier of a modifier. So interesting, right? Okay. So unlike most severance packages, and then this is why you should like sentences where the entire thing is underlined better, because it's kind of awkward to find the second part of this, right? Like it's this, because the line break is in such a strange place. So you're looking here, which is not obvious at one glance. So unlike most severance packages, this is comparing severance packages to workers. It's not a thing. This is comparing severance packages to workers. Not a thing. This is comparing severance packages to the automobile company. Nope, still not a thing. And then this is the auto company's severance package. Now we're talking. And so is this. So D and E do the initial modifier thing correctly. The other choices don't. Now, we got to talk about this difference between D and E here. So, let's talk about modifiers like this. How do you use those? Like, let's say that I gave you a sentence like this. How about this? Let's say the last person, or the last meeting that I am scheduled to attend. Like, notice how this kind of modifier works. I have no idea what the terminology here is, so if you're looking for terminology, I can't help you there. But notice how this works, right? This means that I have to attend the meeting. Like, it's kind of like the ball that I threw, that means I threw the ball. The meeting that I am scheduled to attend means I am scheduled to attend the meeting. So it means that this verb, this is the object of this verb. So this means I am scheduled to attend the meeting. Same thing if you have a sentence that says the ball that I caught. Simpler example, you might want to remember this one. So this means that I caught the ball. So you can see what the problem is here with choice E, because it doesn't really make sense here. This means I caught the ball, which makes perfect sense. But now if you look at choice E, it says the last day that they are scheduled to collect. So this means, unfortunately, it implies that they are collecting days. So, oops, not a thing. Collecting days. Nope, doesn't make sense. Because if you take day out and put in, like, package or something like that, the last package that they are scheduled to collect makes perfect sense. Like like for a delivery driver or something, UPS guy, the last package that the UPS guy is scheduled to collect. That makes sense, because he or she actually has to collect the package, right? So that's the thing. Notice D doesn't have that problem. D says they have to wait until their last scheduled day. So in order to collect, that's what we're saying there. In order to collect, well, it's severance package. Like, it's money that you get paid. So in order to collect means if you want that money, then you have to stay until your last day. Like, you can't leave early. You can't quit before you have days. You can't quit when you still have days left. Derek, dude, I have to read these sentences more than 3 times usually, so don't feel bad about 3 times. I mean, as many times as you have to read it, you should read it, because if you don't have a sense of what it means, then get a sense of what it means before you go on. Lucia, if it, not necessarily, the word that can describe words that are farther away from it under some circumstances. If you want, you can post that question on the forum in the general verbal folder, because that's a long-ish discussion, so I'd rather not sidetrack the study hall with it, but if you want to post it on the forum, then feel free. So, but it's not, a day doesn't mean a day of pay. I mean, it's not what it means. You can't collect a day. You could collect a day's worth of money if it said that, or you could collect a weekly paycheck or a daily wage, but you cannot collect a day. And there's no way of twisting it into, there's no way of twisting that into being correct. Unlike I don't know that I understand the question, but basically if you've got something at the beginning of your sentence that is a modifier of a thing, then you're going to think about it with very similar reasoning. If that's what you're asking. Okay. It means their last day of work. It's their last scheduled day. It's their last day on the job. So, it's not a day of collecting. I mean, they don't have a bunch of days of collecting a severance package. Like, they have to wait until their last day. Last day, period. Last day on the job. I mean, you could, if you want, you could insert on the job here. Their last scheduled day on the job. But I mean, it should be, if that's not clear, then you need to read the sentence more slowly and not jump to the answer choices so fast. Because if you're reading the sentence with enough attention, then you should be able to figure that out, because there's not really much else that could mean. But I mean, you collect a severance package once, so it's not something you collect on a whole bunch of days. The last scheduled. You can't really take away there because there's no such thing as the last day. I mean, each worker presumably has a different last day. Like, not everyone quits at the same time. Difficulty level is not really a thing you should worry about because you won't. In fact, the fact that you have to ask this question is proof that you should not think about it. Because on the test, you're not going to have any idea what the level of these questions is. So it's not, there's no productive thinking that could come out of that. Okay. And also make sure you don't edit these sentences from GMAC. Like, do not worry about what happens if you make changes to these sentences that are not there. Because your hands are full enough already with what's in the existing choices. The last thing you want to do is invent other choices that aren't even there. So be careful with that. Okay, Debbie, you look like you're still typing something. Yeah, well, let's talk about this. Take it to the next page. If you watched enough of these, you probably heard me give this little spiel more times than you would care to listen to it. But you're saying this as though it were a bad thing. Not a bad thing. So yeah, that's what I mean. So that's why we're answering again. You're saying this as though it's a bad thing. It's not. I mean, longer sentences take longer. Shorter sentences take less time. It's just the law of averages, right? It's like if you paint houses for a living. Let's say your painting crew takes 4 hours on average, to paint a house. If you have to paint some giant mansion, then it's going to take you more than 4 hours. And you're not going to be like, oh, darn it, it takes more than 4 hours. Because you're going to be like, dude, it's a big house. It's going to take a long time. And if you have to paint some tiny apartment, then if it even takes you 4 hours, then what the heck are you doing, right? So same sort of thing with these sentences. I mean, will longer sentences take more than the average time? Yeah, of course they will. And that's totally fine. I mean, it's it'll average out. That's why you want to practice these problems in groups and not one at a time, because you don't want to get too obsessed with individual timing. I mean, if you do groups of enough problems, then the short and long ones will cancel each other out, and you'll be fine. And the test does regulate that. There's no chance that, like, if you're doing well, you don't get longer sentences, in case anybody is worried about that. The test regulates the number of, like, long and short problems that everybody sees. So there's no chance that you're going to get longer things if you're doing better. They'll just be different. Okay, let's look at what's the best strategy to approach the whole underlying sentence. Well, that could be anything depending on what's in it. It's not really different from other strategies. I mean, you still want to read the sentence first, figure out what it means, and then look at differences in the choices. I mean, like, nothing is terribly different from shorter underlines. It's just that there's advantages in the sense that you don't have to look back up at the original, but the technique is not any different from what you would do on any other sentence correction problem. Okay, let's move on to another one. How about that one? Okay. Here is a timer. Go for it. Okay, if you don't have an answer, go ahead and pick an answer, please. Okay, Michael, Precious, the usual suspect. You don't have answers. Okay, here is what you picked. This one you guys did pretty well on, so let's make it a quicker discussion. Not unanimous, but, you know, pretty strong spike there at choice D, so let's talk about it. Having finally reached a tentative labor agreement. That's a lot like coming home from school. And by the way, this is just to underscore the way that you should learn to recognize these things. It's all about analogies and just having examples in your head. Like, for example, I have absolutely no idea what this kind of modifier is called. No clue whatsoever. But I do know that it looks functionally the same as coming home from school. And so if that's a modifier that is the starting of the sentence, then so is this. I mean, those are both initial modifiers. That's how you do this. The way to get good and faster, better and faster at sentence correction is to reason by analogy. You want to try to get to the point where you don't have to classify things, or even ever have to classify them in the first place. So having finally reached a tentative labor agreement, so that it needs to be followed by who has finally reached a tentative labor agreement. So who has finally reached a labor agreement? So who has? The board of directors. And if you're not, I mean, again, you should know, because when you read the sentence, you should only be reading for meaning, right? But if this is not perfectly clear when you read the sentence, don't go to the choices until it is clear. Don't go to the choices until you know exactly what you're looking for. So this is not the board of directors. This is also not the board of directors. This is, and this is. So C, D, and E, without sidetracking too much, let me just give you a quick discussion. If you want a much fuller discussion of this sort of parallel structure stuff, check out the parallelism recording. Again, I think it's from sometime in spring of 2010. But here we have both blank and blank. Basically, the things in the blanks must correspond to each other. They must be parallel. They should be written the same way, or at least in as similar a way as possible. Be written the same way to the extent possible. Okay. So here's your boths and your ands. So both, and there's your both, and then here's your and. So the things that are after those have to be matching things. That's how this game works. So if you look at what comes after those things, look at it. So here it's how to make the airline increase profits. But this is not how to compete. This is just compete. So those are not parallel. This is increase profits, and this is compete more effectively. We're happy. These are parallel. Do this, do that. And then this is increase profits, but this is not just compete. This is also how to make it compete. So, and you have redundancy with both and also here. You don't do both of those things. So only D is parallel. Again, if you want way, way, way more about that sort of parallelism, then check out the parallelism recording from spring of a long, long time ago, many moons. All right, let's try another one. So again, the underline the whole sentence here. That's nice. You should like that. Again, if I'm getting my proselytizing message across here, then by the time this study hall is over, you should actually you should start salivating when you see that whole sentence underlined. It's your friend. It's good stuff. You don't have to look up and down all the time, and there's going to be, a lot of the choices will have several things wrong with them. Okay, try it. I'll give you a timer. It is longer than normal, but today it probably isn't because, again, you know what you're looking for, at least part way. But here is a timer, and have fun with this one. Again, don't forget where the choices are located. It's going to be on top of the word for a second. Okay. Go for it. Okay. If you don't have an answer choice, please pick one. Okay, here is what you guys have selected. There. So we got a pretty strong signal on C here. But there's some people picking A and B, and then one lone adventurer picking E. So let's take a look here. So these all have initial modifiers in them, and again, as far as understanding how far those extend, that's a combination of meaning and knowing what modifiers look like. So, because, I mean, if you have an initial modifier, the deal is that it extends until the actual core of the sentence starts. So, meaning here, it's going to actually go until you see your main subject and verb. So, just keep that in mind, because a couple of these have a modifier within a modifier. We saw that before. Like, notice in this problem that we saw earlier, you had a modifier within a modifier. Like the opening modifier here is essentially unlike most severance packages. But then you had this other description of most severance packages. So this let's talk about how far these initial modifiers go. So how much of this is the coming home from school part? So with A, there's only one, comma break in the whole sentence, so you can definitely tell it's that. With B, notice that you have a description of Columbus Day 92 in there. So that whole thing is the coming home from school part, and then this is like a sub modifier that's in there. C is similarly structured. So in fact, it's identical. So that's a modifier inside a modifier. D, this, and then E. Notice on E it actually goes all the way up to 1992 here. It goes all the way up to there. It's a very long initial modifier. Okay. So for A, B, and C, we have to answer the question of what was initiated. So what's the answer to that? Again, this stuff you should know from reading the original sentence. Yeah, the project. Okay. And then for D and E, who or what organization pledged money? I mean, because if I saw pledging an investment, I would probably look for people first. But there's no people in this sentence. So then as a second, as a second stringer, I would go for like a foundation or an organization or something. So this would be the project again. Because you can say that like a charitable foundation pledged money. Like you don't always have to say people. So this is also the project. So let's see if these things work. Well, that's the project. That's not the project. The investment wasn't. I mean, investment's a one-time thing. An investment's not initiated on a certain date. This is the project. This is not the project, and this is not the project. So no E, no D, no B. Okay. Between A and C, does anybody want to try to explain that in the chat box? In the box of chatness. Time 1992. I don't know what you mean by that. Yeah, right. I mean, let's think about what A is saying and whether it makes sense or not. Well, gee whiz, man. So choice A is saying that in 1992, Ron was in high school and these like big ships pulled up outside. That's not really a thing. Like A is saying that the Europeans actually got here in 1992. Oops, that's not a thing. So, I mean, at best, this is ambiguous, and at worst, it definitely has the wrong meaning, because if you were going to stick that modifier on something, it would be the closest thing. So, this suggests that the Europeans arrived in 1992, question mark, exclamation point. So, that's nothing. And I mean, even if you didn't know that, I mean, like, you probably know enough history to know that Europeans did not get to America in 1992. But even if you, perchance, somehow didn't know that, you can figure out this is still not a thing because 5 centuries after that date hasn't happened yet. If you had a comma, it would still be, you would still have the same issue, though. You would still have that modifier next to when the Europeans got to the New World. It would still be ambiguous and pointing towards the wrong direction. Notice that C doesn't do that. Like C, you have this modifier that is specifically placed after Columbus Day 1992, so this is correctly 5 centuries after Europeans got here. Is correctly describing Columbus Day 1992. So you don't have this issue of weirdness here. And that is the story. Okay. We probably have time for one more. Is the sound going for other people? Lucia, don't worry about changes in meaning, just worry about whether the meaning makes sense. Like, as long as you have a sentence that makes sense, you are fine, and as long as you have a sentence that does not make sense, you are not fine. It doesn't, the original meaning is not sacred. I mean, any choice that is not nonsense is just as good as any other choice that's not nonsense. The forum is at this address, and the old presentations there's only one web page of Thursdays with Ron, and all of those everything is on one page. So if the older recordings are just scroll down on the same page and you'll find them. So, okay, underline completely, otherwise, no, as long as you have a sentence that makes sense, you are fine. I mean, in other words, it makes no difference which choice is choice A. Like, if I switch choice A with one of the other choices, it doesn't change what the correct answer is. So, you need to think about whether it makes sense or whether it doesn't make sense. There's nothing special about the meaning of choice A. Okay. Emmanuel, I'm not sure exactly what you are trying to say there, but let's move on to another problem while there is still time. Okay, let's try. Yeah, Debbie, that's basically what there is. I mean, that's what exists in sentences, so yes. I mean, there's also style, which is not tested on the GMAT because testing style would be inaccessible to non-native speakers of English. So they stick with those things that you've listed. In other words, yes. Okay. Let's talk about this problem. Last one of the day. We'll run a few minutes past time, but we started a little bit late, so we'll break even here. Okay, while you guys pick answers here, make sure, if any of you guys are following the conversation in the chat box, make sure you don't think of meaning and grammar as though they were separate things, because they're not. I mean, if you think about what grammar is, it's not a system of random rules. Like, grammar is a system of rules that are designed to get a meaning across. And that's why grammatical rules exist, you know, in order to make meaning clear. So you can't really divorce those two concepts from each other. Like, you can't really apply grammar rules unless you know what you're trying to say. So, like, just think about all these initial modifiers here, right? Like, if you're just thinking in terms of pure mechanics, there's nothing wrong with any of these modifiers because these are all nouns. But the ones that don't mean what you try to mean are the ones that don't work, right? You can't separate out meaning and grammar from one another, so make sure you don't try to do that. Okay, let's talk about this really quick. We have unlike emergency calls, and then we have some modifier there. So, unlike, that's a modifier, and in a couple of these sentences it actually goes all the way there. This where they blah 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 describes the telephone line. So in fact, that's a modifier that goes all the way up to there. So that is your initial modifier in the original sentence, which is right there. In B, it goes to here. In C, it's lines, but then thus, blah, 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 is more description. So it goes up to here. This goes up to here. And this goes up to here. Okay, so unlike emergency calls that travel through phone lines, so we got to be comparing these to other calls. So it's emergency calls versus other calls, some other calls. In this case, it's cellular calls. So we need cellular calls after coming home from school. So this is fine, this is fine, this is not fine. this is not fine, and this is not fine. And hopefully after today, this kind of elimination is going to be very efficient. Like, you're going to be on it, because the good thing about initial modifiers is you can't really hide them very well, because they're at the start of the sentence. So it's hard to bury that in a bunch of other stuff if it's at the beginning. That's why they're so nice. So we're down to A and B. And how do we decide between A and B? Anybody want to talk about it in the chat box? A versus B. Yeah, where, I mean, phone lines are a place, so that's not, you can't just strike it for that reason. But phone lines are not, phone lines are a physical location, but they aren't where this happens. Like, where they inform the operator, I mean, the operator does not live inside the phone lines, so this doesn't make any sense. Like, they would have to inform the operator, or wherever the operator is holding up a phone, or something like that. So, and then, I mean, I don't think there's a problem with they, because they would just be the calls. But the where here is really the crux of the problem. The where and the thus, you also have some weirdly contrasting meanings there. Like, if it's just a place where something happens, then it's not a thus. But if it's a thus, then you're saying it's a result rather than a place. I mean, these two don't really coexist, because this is just saying this is where this happens, and this is saying this is why this happens. Where, why. Not really coexisting. Here you take out the where and you just have a structure that conveys what it's supposed to convey. Notice here's your and, so you got parallel structures. Thus and automatically are descriptors, so those don't have to be parallel to other things. So the second half of the parallelism is inform, and the first half of the parallelism is travel. Inform, travel. If you want much more info about finding that kind of parallelism, again, check that study hall from spring 2000. So this is totally legit, and they travel through regular phone lines. And because they travel through regular phone lines, they're automatic. Like, you can trace them. So this is the reason for that. It makes sense to use thus here, and not where. So we want B-boy. All right. Lucia, if it's clear enough from context what a pronoun stands for, then the pronoun's fine. I mean, you don't have to get rid of all other plural nouns. That would be a bit excessive. Like, as long as it's not legitimately unclear. Like here, it's pretty obvious that we're talking about the calls. So the telephone lines are not going to suddenly start talking to people. So that's fine. That's not really an issue. Okay, let's close up shop here. We're a few minutes over, break even for being a few minutes late. And any quick questions, feel free. If not, we're gonna stop here in a sec. If you have suggestions for future topics, you know where to post them. Not here. Go to the Thursdays with Ron webpage, and there's a submission form. Any quick business questions, feel free. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. And that's it for now. I don't know if there's one on the 19th or not yet. I don't remember. So I'll actually have to look at the page myself. I'll have to look at the same page you guys have to look at. So, all right. You're welcome, and good night, and good luck. I'm going to go ahead and disable the recording at this point, and thank you for attending.